The 2024 U.S. presidential election has entered uncharted territory following an attempted assassination on Donald Trump during a campaign rally in August. The attack left Trump injured, but he quickly recovered, and the incident sparked a new wave of fervor among his supporters. The attempt on Trump's life has only heightened the already volatile political atmosphere, placing both candidates in the spotlight as the nation grapples with issues of political violence, division, and the future of its democracy. Trump, for his part, has used the incident to further solidify his narrative that he is fighting against a corrupt and desperate political system, determined to stop him by any means necessary. Kamala Harris, on the other hand, condemned the violence while reaffirming her commitment to addressing the deep-rooted problems facing the country through unity, empathy, and progressive policies. The assassination attempt sent shockwaves through American politics, raising questions about security, the tone of political discourse, and the possibility of further escalation as the election approaches. Both candidates have responded in markedly different ways, with Trump embracing the role of a political martyr, while Harris emphasizes the importance of healing the nation's divisions. As the two continue to vie for the presidency, the stakes are incredibly high, not only for the United States, but for the rest of the world as well. The attempted assassination of Donald Trump on a sweltering August afternoon shocked the world. As he stood before a crowd of supporters in a key battleground state, a lone gunman managed to fire several shots before being shot dead by security. Trump was hit, but survived, suffering injuries that required a brief hospitalization. Within days, Trump was back on the campaign trail, using the incident to galvanize his supporters and cast himself as the victim of a political conspiracy. The message resonated deeply with his base, already steeped in a belief that the political establishment, media, and even parts of the Republican Party are working together to thwart his return to the presidency. In the immediate aftermath of the attempt, Trump's poll numbers saw a noticeable boost, as many voters, particularly undecideds, viewed him as a symbol of resilience and strength in the face of violence. His supporters, already convinced of the righteousness of his campaign, became even more fervent, attending rallies in greater numbers and donating more generously. Trump's ability to use the assassination attempt to his advantage became one of the defining moments of the 2024 campaign, reinforcing his narrative of being the political outsider fighting against a corrupt establishment. Kamala Harris, who was campaigning in another state at the time of the attack, immediately condemned the violence. In a statement released shortly after the news broke, Harris expressed sympathy for Trump and his family, emphasizing that political violence has no place in a democratic society. "What happened today is a reminder that our political divisions have reached a dangerous point," Harris said. "We must come together, not tear each other apart, and reject the kind of extremism that leads to these horrific acts." Despite this, Harris's campaign remained focused on issues of governance, policy, and rebuilding America. Her emphasis on unity and the rule of law contrasted with Trump's more combative and confrontational tone, reflecting the broader differences between the two candidates. Donald Trump's domestic agenda is largely a continuation of the policies that defined his first term in office, with an even greater emphasis on nationalism, deregulation, and economic populism. Trump remains steadfast in his commitment to strict border controls. He has pledged to complete the border wall that became a symbol of his 2016 campaign and to implement even harsher immigration policies. His campaign promises to crack down on undocumented immigration, limit asylum claims, and increase deportations. Trump's economic vision focuses on reducing government intervention in the economy. He has pledged to roll back regulations on industries like energy, finance, and manufacturing, arguing that this will lead to economic growth and job creation. Trump also plans to extend the tax cuts passed during his presidency, which he claims will benefit businesses and working-class Americans alike. Trump's approach to crime remains firmly rooted in a law and order philosophy. He advocates for increased funding for police departments, harsher sentencing laws, and greater support for law enforcement officers. In his view, the rising crime rates in some cities are a direct result of soft-on-crime policies supported by Democrats, and he vows to restore law and order across the country. On foreign policy, Trump's worldview is characterized by a focus on American sovereignty and a rejection of multilateralism. His America First doctrine, which defined his first term, remains central to his foreign policy platform. Trump has promised to continue his trade war with China, imposing tariffs on Chinese goods and renegotiating trade deals that he believes have disadvantaged American workers. He also aims to reduce America's reliance on global supply chains, advocating for the return of manufacturing jobs to U.S. soil. Trump has been a vocal critic of NATO and other international alliances, arguing that they benefit other nations at the expense of the United States. He has called for reducing U.S. contributions to international organizations and pulling back from what he sees as unnecessary foreign entanglements. This isolationist stance is popular among his base, but has raised concerns among U.S. allies. Trump's relationships with both Russia and China are fraught with complexity. While he has been criticized for his perceived leniency towards Vladimir Putin, Trump insists that his tough stance on NATO and the withdrawal from international agreements demonstrate his commitment to American strength. With China, Trump's focus is primarily economic, with his trade war intended to curb China's growing influence and protect American industries. Kamala Harris, in contrast to Trump, has built her campaign around progressive reforms aimed at addressing inequality, climate change, and restoring America's international standing. Her domestic policies focus on expanding government support for healthcare, education, and social services, while also tackling systemic issues like racial injustice and income inequality. Harris has long been a supporter of expanding healthcare access, and her campaign is built around strengthening the Affordable Care Act and introducing a public healthcare option. She advocates for expanding Medicaid, lowering prescription drug prices, and providing universal coverage to ensure that all Americans have access to affordable health care. Climate change is central to Harris's campaign. She supports rejoining the Paris Climate Accord, reducing carbon emissions, and investing in renewable energy. Harris's plan includes ambitious goals for reducing the country's reliance on fossil fuels and creating millions of new jobs in the green energy sector. A former prosecutor, Harris has emphasized the need for comprehensive criminal justice reform. She supports ending cash bail, eliminating mandatory minimum sentences for nonviolent offenders, and implementing national standards for police use of force. Harris is also a vocal advocate for dismantling systemic racism within the criminal justice system. On the global stage, Harris represents a return to the multilateralism that characterized the Obama-Biden administration. Harris has promised to rebuild America's relationships with its traditional allies, particularly in Europe and Asia. She supports strengthening NATO and other international alliances to counter the growing influence of Russia and China. Harris also advocates for greater cooperation on global issues like climate change, cybersecurity, and pandemics. Harris's approach to China and Russia is one of strategic engagement. While she supports being tough on China when it comes to trade practices and human rights abuses, she also believes in working with China on global issues like climate change and public health. With Russia, Harris has called for strengthening sanctions and holding the Kremlin accountable for its actions in Ukraine and its interference in democratic processes around the world. Harris has positioned herself as a champion of human rights, advocating for stronger international action to address issues like genocide, political oppression, and gender inequality. She believes that the U.S. must reclaim its role as a leader on the world stage, not just through military strength, but by promoting democratic values and human rights. The outcome of the 2024 election will have profound implications for the rest of the world. Under Trump, the U.S. would likely continue to retreat from global leadership, focusing instead on domestic issues and bilateral relationships that prioritize American interests. This could lead to increased instability in regions where the U.S. has traditionally played a stabilizing role, such as the Middle East and Europe. Trump's trade war with China would almost certainly escalate, causing further disruptions to global markets and supply chains. Moreover, Trump's strained relationships with NATO and other global organizations could weaken the West's ability to respond to challenges posed by authoritarian regimes like those in Russia and China. Domestically, a Trump victory would likely lead to further polarization, as his policies continue to appeal to Trump presidency, with his continued focus on nationalism and economic populism would likely result in more deregulation and stricter immigration policies, increasing polarization within the country. His governance could further erode trust in U.S. institutions, deepening societal divisions. Economically, Trump would push for greater deregulation and pro-business policies, which could result in short-term gains, but may also lead to growing inequality. His policies on healthcare, tax cuts, and law enforcement would maintain the status quo from his previous term, which appeals to his base but alienates progressives and moderates. On the global stage, a second Trump presidency would be characterized by isolationism, reducing America's involvement in international organizations and conflicts, and increasing tensions with China, Russia, and NATO. This could lead to an uncertain and volatile geopolitical environment where the U.S. withdraws from its traditional leadership role, leaving a vacuum that authoritarian regimes could fill. Trump's trade wars and focus on America First policies could further strain global trade and economics, impacting not just the U.S., but economies worldwide. Conversely, a Harris presidency would see the U.S. re-engage with the international community, leading efforts to combat climate change, human rights abuses, and global inequality. Domestically, Harris would likely pursue progressive reforms, expanding healthcare, addressing systemic racism, and pushing for comprehensive criminal justice reform. Her approach would likely seek to unite the country through policies aimed at reducing income inequality and increasing access to social services. In foreign policy, Harris's multilateral approach would focus on strengthening alliances, addressing global challenges through diplomacy, and holding autocratic regimes accountable. Her emphasis on climate change, international cooperation, and global leadership would likely restore America's standing on the world stage and promote a more stable international order. Ultimately, the election of either candidate will have far-reaching consequences, both for the U.S. and the world. The sharp contrast between Trump and Harris reflects the broader ideological battle within the U.S., and the outcome will shape the country's trajectory for decades to come.